All right. So we are getting ready to hire that real estate agent. So before we hire the real estate agent, I want to go over a few things. And so when you hire a real estate agent, you need to make sure you understand what type of a relationship you're going to have with that real estate agent. Okay, so there are a few things out there. Most of the time, the real estate agent, and we're talking about the buying side in this class, is going to represent you and only you. But there are times that things can happen, and you need to make sure you understand how it's going to be handled. For example, what happens if you are interested in a house that your agent has listed, where they have already listed the house, or maybe they have a seller come to them and they have a seller who wants to sell a house, and it's a house that that agent knows that you would be interested in. Or what if a for sale by owner comes up and the for sale by owner isn't offering to pay any agent fees? Who is going to pay your real estate agent? So you want to make sure you know fully where your agent's obligations lie in a bunch of different situations. So the first thing is that they are a buyer's agent, and they are solely representing you, and they're going to do anything they can to help you out as long as it's ethical and legal. As we talked about in the role of the real estate agent, they may have to notify the seller if they find out that, you aren't able to perform on your contract, or if there's something, an adverse fact that they are obligated to share. And there may be a case where they know the seller, their obligations are still to you, and maybe they know something about the seller, and maybe they help that seller buy the house. There are some agency things that could still exist, but really you want to know what is your agent going to do in certain situations. So lots of times in the beginning, and it may not be, you may have looked at a house, maybe you haven't. Ideally, you would do this paperwork before you looked at a house, but that's not always realistic, and I certainly don't always operate that way. You're going to have a conversation with your agent about these things and go over some of them. So let's take a look at my screen here, and this is a relationships in real estate form that kind of outlines some of these things. And we're not worried about the seller side as much right now. We're really more worried about the buyer side right now. And so, like it says, that the form is that the agent is to work in the buyer's best interest. Now, they have to disclose any and all relevant material information that concerns the real estate transaction that is known to the buyer's agent and not known or discoverable by the buyer. So, that you want to know all that. You want to know all the things that, they know, right? But they're also obligated to the seller to disclose any adverse material facts that are known to the buyer's agent that concern the ability of the buyer to perform on your contract, right? So we've got that down. And they've got to disclose to the seller, the agent if the buyer agent has no personal knowledge they're basically disclosing that they don't know, they're not your lender, probably. Okay. Then there's what happens if they want to become a dual agency. And so dual agency is where they're going to represent both sides. Maybe it's on a listing they have or a house that they know. And so in order to do dual agency, usually it's called disclose, disclose, disclose. I am not a fan of dual agency. I do not like the idea that a real estate agent is going to do in the best interest of the seller and in the best interest of the buyer. Those best interests rarely line up. But occasionally they do. Then there's also called a statutory broker. Maybe that's where party A wants to sell to party B, and they're just hiring the agent to do the paperwork and explain it. They're not really representing any side. They're just explaining the paperwork and completing the buy-sell. They're basically following the instructions and making sure that they can work with title and get things done. Statutory broker is usually where the buyer and the seller know each other, and they're just hiring you to do the paperwork. Dual agency is the one that gets people in trouble, where you're representing both sides. So in Montana, when you get down here, I think it's very normal and okay for you to have these hard conversations with your agent about how they're going to handle certain things. I would not give blanket authorization to your buyer's agent to work as a dual agent. I would want to know what is, and I'm looking at line 98 right now, making sure that you understand why they're working as a dual agency, what the relationship is on the other side, and why they think it's in your best interest to allow them to do dual agency. So I wouldn't give blanket authorization on dual agency. I'd make them come back and get that when it comes up. Okay. Now, I do think it is reasonable for you to allow your real estate agent to work with other buyers who may be interested in similar properties as you. They use the word term maybe, like that's such a vague term. buyers change what they're looking for or what they think, or something gets listed that's right by a relative. Maybe now they are interested in a house that's competes with you. Like, that is really a vague term, and I don't know how real estate agents can operate with more than one buyer if they can't show properties that may compete. Now, there should be a process if two people want to make an offer on a house. Are you allowing that agent to write two offers for two different buyers? Your agent should be able to explain to you how they're going to handle that, whether it's going to be the first person that tells them that they want to write an offer or the first person they showed the house to. There's times when you show a house and people say, no, I'm not interested at all. And you think, well, I know somebody who would be, and then they bring you in, you see the house, you want to make the offer, and then the original client calls them back and says, oh, we changed our mind, now we do want to write an offer. How are we going to handle those situations? So whether that gets handed off to another agent in their agency or another agent or an agent on their team, there's lots of different ways to handle this, but you want to make sure you understand how your real estate agent is going to handle those situations when they need to write multiple offers on the same property, and how it's going to be handled, and are they going to do a dual agency? So let's recap that a little bit. Is your agent working for just you, or are they asking you for authorization to dual agency? How are they going to handle it if multiple people want to write an offer on on the same house? And what happens if a seller or somebody they know wants to sell a house and it's a house you would be interested in? How are they going to handle it? So make sure you go over those things. Make sure you understand this relationships form, and know what to expect in those situations, because they do come up. Now let's talk about the representation form, and specifically lots of times commissions and how the commissions are going to get paid, because we want to make sure how your broker or your agent is going to expect to get paid. So we have two forms. One is the short form and one is the long form in Montana. The short form really just outlines, again, the authorization for the real estate agent to work on your behalf and acknowledges that they can't violate any laws or fair housing. Okay, and there's two forms of this. Either it's a non-exclusive where you're free to work with multiple agents, or an exclusive where you are stuck with that agent until it expires. I actually prefer non-exclusive. I think that if I'm doing a good job and I communicate clearly with you, you're going to understand that you need to call me to set up all your showings. You need to call me before you have any contact with the seller, or you need to make sure I know that if you're going to have any contact with the seller's agent. I'm going to represent you. We're going to have great communication. You are not going to muddy the waters by calling the listing agent, which is something we want to make sure you don't do. Once you hire a real estate agent, do not call the listing agent. The listing agent's obligations are to the seller, not to you. It actually causes a headache when you try to be nice to your buyer's agent by calling the listing agent to set up a showing. So don't do it. Back to an exclusive or non-exclusive. If we're not getting along or you don't think I'm doing a good job, I want you to be able to move on. Now, I also understand that I don't want to show you houses for 6 months and at the last minute have you be like, yeah, nope, we're moving on. We're going with a different agent and buy the house with them. Like, I deserve to get paid for my time. So it can go back and forth. I like non-exclusive and just open communication. Okay. It also, again, goes over those things that we talked about in role of the real estate agent, that the real estate agent is not a plumber, an electrician, a home inspector, a lawyer, all of those types of things. General conditions and what you're looking for, and wire fraud. We can't talk about wire fraud enough. Wire fraud is real. You likely will get emails from people that are spam. Do not take wire instructions via email. Call the title company after you Google them and you call them and make sure it's the right phone number and get them from them directly, and then they don't change at the last minute. Preferably bring a cashier's check to the closing company. So that is the short form. There's also a longer form that we're starting to see come into play more often. In Montana, it's starting to, and it really talks more about compensation. And so what you want to make sure you understand is, how is your broker going to be compensated? Normally, the listing agent is going to share their fee with your agent. Now, what happens if it's a for sale by owner? Or what happens if the seller isn't willing to allow the listing agent to pay your agent a fee, or maybe it's a fee that's lower than what your agent expects? You need to make sure you understand how those are going to be handled. If it's a for sale by owner, are you going to be willing to make an offer that is, includes paying your agent? So all things you want to go over in these representation documents. Understand who's paying expenses, what happens in different situations. If the selling agent and the seller are offering a commission to the buyer, is that going to be good enough? Or what if it's lower than expected? Or what if there is no compensation offer? So These are all just conversations you want to have, but you want to make sure you go over your relationships and real estate form and your buyer agency relationship form, your buyer broker form, and understand them and understand how you're going to get represented in each situation and who's going to pay what fees. Have these conversations now. You don't want to have them when you are in love with a property and all of a sudden the agent's throwing things at you and saying, no, you need to do this or that because this is what I expect to get. Like, understand it now. Don't understand it later. So super important to understand how your agent's going to get paid and what type of a relationship and how that can change. So folks, this is really important stuff and you want to get it out of the way early on. The good news is once you get through all of this paperwork and you understand it and you feel great about the real estate agent that you just hired, now it's time to go look at properties. We have finally reached that spot where you can go look at properties, but you need to look at properties that are within your budget. Understand the market, understand market conditions. Don't go look at properties that have no hope of coming down into your budget. Stay in your budget or in a reasonable amount where the house has been listed long enough that you may be able to bring it down 10, 20,000 or whatever it is. But don't think you're going to go look at these houses that are outside your budget because you're not going to appreciate what is in your budget. So it's time to go look at houses. It's time to have some fun. This is the fun part. As always, reach out to me if you have any questions, and we will continue this course in the next video.